So they call this thing a national security secret so that nobody can talk about it. The American Cancer Society goes around and starts telling everybody the viruses can't cause cancer and stuff, and, which is kind of funny today because they're selling the HPV vaccine. So how can you have a vaccine against a cancer-causing virus if you don't have a cancer-causing virus? They can't deny it anymore. And then they decided they wanted to get really busy trying to come up with a solution before the public found out about the problem. Maybe they could create a vaccine to stop the cancer-causing virus. And when I got into the statistics of this, when I read about this, I said, oh, geez, Pete, wouldn't the media be screaming about this? Where's the information on this? So I went to the medical library and I dug through the statistics and stuff, and I brought the stuff home and put it on my computer, and I found there's this huge epidemic of soft tissue cancers in the United States. We got back 15 cases of cancer per year for every one case of polio. And which is why we're having a cancer epidemic today, which doesn't get discussed in those terms.
Sure.
They're willing to talk about 122 cases of bird flu virus, but on September 11th, 2001, more Americans died of cancer than died of terrorism.
Yeah, good point.
Good point. And every day since then. And so where's the coverage?
Well, now, of course, as I mentioned in our opening segment with you, Ed, that, there's this swine flu and massive, vaccinations and antidotes are going to be developed. Of course, we know the usual suspects profit from something like that. It makes you wonder how far will they go to profit from something like that. I've looked at this swine flu and announced on my program that it's largely an illusion and a hoax because they can benefit without there even actually being a disease. I'm not one of the people that took a polio vaccine. I somehow escaped that. I don't know how. I'm of the age where all of my classmates took it. I don't have the scars. I didn't get it, and maybe that's why I'm still alive today. Ed, we've got to talk about this because the very weird... the whole weirdness of this being kind of associated with David Ferrie, and of course Garrison investigated him as being one of the main perpetrators of the JFK assassination. We have to talk about that because that is really one of the most riveting aspects of your book, which I'm about halfway through now. Start talking about that. One of the weird things I read in your book is you had met a girl when you were going to college and went over to her apartment, and later you found out this was David Ferrie's extra apartment where he kept thousands of mice. What was he doing? What was David Ferrie doing? And who is Mary Sherman? Why is this renowned cancer researcher overworking with the weird David Ferrie on cancer research?
Well, it's kind of a complicated story, but let me, on page 1 of the book, I say this is a cold case investigation into the murder of Mary Sherman. And that is really kind of where it needs to start. She was a cancer researcher in New Orleans who was murdered in 1964, less than a year after the Kennedy assassination. And it was one of the strangest murders that ever happened in New Orleans. And, the rumor mill was, she was found naked, and she'd been stabbed 7 or 8 times, in her bedroom, and she'd been set on fire. And, everybody just had the worst possible conclusions about this. But that was in 64. And a couple of years later, in 1967, when Jim Garrison started investigating Lee Oswald and the Kennedy assassination, he gave an interview to Playboy magazine. And in that interview, he was asked a question about whether Jack Ruby had died of cancer and whether that could have been intentional and stuff or whatever. And he kind of dodged the question, and he said, "But we have discovered that David Ferrie, who was Garrison's prime suspect in the murder of Jack Kennedy and was the guy that Joe Pesci played in Oliver Stone's movie, that David Ferrie had been doing some secret cancer research with this Dr. Mary Sherman, who had been mysteriously murdered." And that connection between David Ferrie and Mary Sherman was overlooked by just about everybody in the JFK research community, and the reason is they didn't know who Mary Sherman was. Now, I knew who Mary Sherman was because Mary Sherman was like my father's best friend, okay? And they both were professors of orthopedic surgery at Tulane Medical School, which is why they knew each other. And Mary Sherman was from the University of Chicago, which is a great big powerhouse school.
It's where the neocons come from and the neoliberals, founded by the Rockefellers, yes.
Exactly. It's all funded by the Rockefellers. And the big scientist in the history of the place, has been plenty of Nobel Prize people up there, but the guy that really set the tone for the University of Chicago was Enrico Fermi, who did the first sustained nuclear reaction. He filled in the periodic table. He's considered to be the father of the atomic bomb. Okay, he was an expert in radiation, and so was Mary Sherman. Okay, she was an expert in cancer and an expert in the medical uses of radiation, and she was published in both areas, and she ran a cancer laboratory in New Orleans for Dr. Alton Ochsner, who's one of the spookiest doctors in American history.
Yeah, right. He's a right-wing, people in South America have called him a fascist dictator supporting right-wing nutcase.
Yeah, who winds up being involved in Lee Harvey Oswald's radio debates.
Yes.
So, at that point, your listeners can go, huh? Because what are all these players doing together? I mean, Mary Sherman's a first-string, top-tier American scientist. I mean, she's even the chairman of the pathology committee of the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons, okay?
Yeah.
What is she doing running an underground medical laboratory with David Ferry?
That's the question.
It's a bizarre thing. And in 1995, when I published the first version of this book under a different name, I had the story, but I didn't have the witness. I didn't have anybody that said, yeah, I was there, we did this, I admit it, and everything else. And then in the year 2000, I got a phone call from 60 Minutes, and they said, we're investigating this woman, a pretty interesting woman. She keeps telling us that she's was in this laboratory you wrote about in your book, and would you like to talk to us about this? And it was not a good time to ask me the question, but I eventually gave in and talked to them, and they introduced me to this woman that had a couple of things about her I thought was very interesting. One is she could prove that she was trained to handle cancer-causing monkey viruses before she went to New Orleans in 1963.
And you're talking about Judith Very Baker.
I'm talking about Judith Very Baker. I'll get to that. And she could prove that she was trained to handle cancer-causing monkey viruses. And she could also prove that she worked at the Riley Coffee Company with Lee Harvey Oswald, started on the same day he did, was there the same length of time. And I found it very interesting that a person who is trained in cancer research would be working with Lee Harvey Oswald at a company owned by one of Alton Ochsner's best friends, who was one of his biggest supporters in this anti-communist Inca organization that did all the radio debates with Oswald. I mean, that's such an outrageous cluster of events that I said, I want to find out more about this woman. And I started studying her in detail, and I discovered that there's a lot of newspaper articles and stuff about what she was doing way back in high school. And she was winning all these incredible science awards, doing stuff like pulling magnesium out of seawater and stuff. But in 1961, in her senior year in high school, she had been, she was crazy about cancer, okay? I mean, she watched her grandmother die from it. Her goal in life was to cure it, okay? And she had gone and listened to the speech by Alton Ochsner, who was opening some local hospital down here in Florida, and she got all inspired about lung cancer. So she went back and changed her science experiment at school to try to give lung cancer to mice, okay? And she's a very smart gal and very industrious, and guess what? She figured out how to give mice lung cancer in 7 days, okay? And
this had to have the CIA just drooling. I can't make the proper metaphor, but they were very excited about that kind of a discovery.
Yeah, and what happens is the American Cancer Society decides to hold their annual national press briefing on the state of the art in cancer in St. Petersburg, Florida, in March or so, and that's a very That's what you do. When everybody else is in snow, you hold a meeting in Florida so everybody wants to come, okay? And that's St. Petersburg. It's like 22 miles up the road from Bradenton. And so she decides to crash the party. And she literally hitchhikes up there and walks into the annual meeting of the American Cancer Society for the press briefing and meets the people who are in charge of
Let's pick up, Ed, let's pick up there when we come back because I got to go to break. We're with Ed Haslam, Dr. Mary's Monkey. We're just going to scratch the surface in this hour interview today, but it's enough, I hope, to get you interested to read the book. It opens up a whole new world about what's going on with these viruses. Stay tuned.